Well, good morning and a warm welcome to all of our participants to this special Fraikin hosted webinar on this World Sustainable Transport Day. Thank you for joining us today, and we envisage that the webinar should last for about an hour. I'm Peter Backhouse, Fraikin's UK Chief Executive Officer, and I've been in and around the supply chain logistics and transportation industry for around 40 years now. Yes, I can remember when Euro 1 engine technology was introduced in 1992 and made the fitting of a catalytic converter mandatory. Shock horror. 24 years later, in 2014, we all thought Euro 6 would be the last great engine change. And I can remember the manufacturers at the time saying it spits out cleaner air than it takes in. Of course, we now know that even Euro 6 is not enough to avert a climate crisis. And to be truly sustainable, we have to eliminate all vehicle emissions as part of a huge jigsaw to achieve the complete picture of a sustainable planet. We can move to the next slide, please. This UK-focused webinar is a series of discussions Fraikin is hosting across our European-wide group. Earlier, we heard from our Spanish and our Central European entities, and later today we will hear from our French entity. We are all covering the same important topic of ultimately converting all vehicles to a world where they will all emit zero emissions. It may sound like a problem for tomorrow, but in reality, we must all begin that journey today. If we are to achieve the climate targets scientists and world leaders tell us are vital for us to hit, and fast. To make this a successful event today, I'm delighted to introduce you to our panel of subject experts who each bring a wealth of knowledge on our topics. We have for you Colin Melvin, who is our Fraikin UK Commercial Director, and who works very closely with all of our customers to provide leading and cost-effective fleet solutions that support their business operations on a daily basis. Colin has been supporting customers as they embark on their zero-emission strategies. Martin Flach is our expert EV independent consultant, and he will also be our moderator for today. Martin's in-depth knowledge of the world of zero-emission vehicles will help us to navigate through the topic, and he provides strategic, operational, and practical insights to the discussions. Tony Stevens, who is Deputy Director of Group Fleet Services at DEFRA, joins us to share his own experiences of managing and operating critical vehicles in an alternative fuels environment. And then Lewis Jones, who is EV and Connected Services Director at DAF, will provide us with a market-leading manufacturer's approach towards addressing and supporting this new market and in meeting future manufacturers' supplier targets. Welcome to the speakers, and thank you all for giving us your time and your deep knowledge today. So why are we all here? Well, primarily because we cannot ignore that progressively the transport sector is moving towards zero-emission alternative fuels, with electric vehicle engine technology very much leading the way. So with the global theme today, what a great time to prompt us to all explore and learn more on this topic. We will look at the current UK market, discuss strategies, learn from early adopters, and gain insights from both a manufacturer's and an operational perspective. We'll then reflect on how we at Fraikin can sit central to this exciting transition, harnessing our capabilities, knowledge, experience, and skills to work with the supply chain and with our customers to achieve the very best future fleet strategy outcomes. Unfortunately, we're unable to take live questions. However, please do take the opportunity to record any questions you have using the email address on this slide. We'll collate all the questions, obtain answers from the speakers, and then circulate them back to all parties attending today. We move to the next slide. Staggeringly, in the UK, around 25% of all carbon emissions are generated by the transportation sector, meaning that for future sustainability, This must change. With commercial vehicles making up at just 13% of the vehicles in the UK, they pump out about a third of all vehicle emissions. To achieve UK emission targets and contribute towards global targets, our industry must embrace change, adopt decarbonisation as a core business strategy, and move forward with increased urgency in addressing all of the enablers critical to achieving these objectives. The Zero Emission Vehicle, or ZEV, mandate became law in January 2024 and is designed to ramp up sales of car and LCV ZEV vehicles each year until 2035. The ZEV mandate for HGV targets increasing adoption levels as fleets are due to be replaced fully from 2040, when all vehicles sold must be to ZEV standard. It's clear then that against the backdrop of environmental, political, consumer and social pressures, our industry has to now accelerate vehicle model availability, cost attractiveness and infrastructure capability to support a sea change of adoption of zero emission vehicles, making it easier and more compelling for our whole industry to accelerate strategic transition to the new transportation world that lays ahead of us. I'd now like to pass to Martin to continue with the webinar.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning to everyone. I actually can beat Peter. I've been 48 years in the commercial vehicle industry, starting off as a lad, and I've seen it move from the days where the vehicle consisted of a very simple engine, a very simple gearbox, and the major electric component on the vehicle was the lights and the radio. So we now have moved to a level of complexity on vehicles and the desire to reduce emissions, not just from decarbonisation, but also for air quality. And that has taken us to the point where we now have targets where we need to be looking at how we're going to achieve them. But I think before we start looking at that, let's look at what the timeline looks like. And we've divided it into two. So the light commercial vehicles are above the diagonal line and the heavy commercial vehicles below. On the light commercial vehicles, the requirement for 2035 for all new light commercial vehicles to be zero emission. But it's not wait until 2035 before anything happens, because year on year, the requirement for the sales is from 10% last year up to 16% this year, following on to 46% in 2028. And by 2030, in only 5 years' time, that's got to be 70% of the vehicles sold. Now, that's quite a challenge, and we'll look at that in a minute. On the heavy vehicle side, it's a little bit more complicated in that the target is not on vehicles sold. The target is based on carbon emissions compared to 2019 that are calculated using a quite complex tool called Vecto. And the manufacturers have got to achieve a 15% reduction by 2025 and then a 30% reduction by 2030. Now, there's some talk about that 30% being higher, maybe even as high as 45%. But the challenge is, how do you do that? And you won't do that carbon emissions reduction by just reducing fuel consumption. You'll have to have a lot of zero emission vehicles in that mix. The UK target for the heavy goods vehicles for the phase out of heavy commercial non-zero emission vehicles is 2035 for up to 26 tonnes and 2040 for above 26 tonnes. Now, that sounds a long way away, but it isn't. It's really quite a short time. So where are we? If I start to look at the light commercial vehicles, this is in the whole vehicle park of vehicles registered. On the light commercial, at the end of 2024, what we can see is that of just short of 5 million vehicles, around 95% of them are diesel, which is pretty much what you would expect. Diesel has been the default choice for pretty much the last half of the 20th century and all of the 21st century. There's a handful of petrol engines remaining out there, which are largely on the very small light commercial vehicles, the car-derived vans. What we're now seeing is the battery electrics are starting to become significant numbers. Hybrids, not significant, but they're still there. And there's a few gas vehicles out there, and really just on the starting blocks, fuel cell electrics, where there are 2 vehicles registered, so really nothing. And what you can see is that picture for the electric vehicles, the battery electric vehicles, has been growing fairly steadily since 2020. And we'll look in a minute at how it's progressing from there. But they're up to around about 1.6%. So it's starting to move in the right direction. That obviously is the percentage of the total number of vehicles registered. Now, that's not the same as the target for the manufacturer, where they have to produce a certain number of vehicles and sell a certain number of vehicles in a year. So we'll see that in a minute. If we move to the next slide, we can see the same picture for the heavy commercial vehicles. And what we see at the end of 2024, there were 4,500 battery electrics registered, but out of a total of just over 500,000 vehicles, it's under 1%. The diesels are obviously the majority with 98.5%, and there's a gas vehicle production sales which equates to around about 3,200 vehicles at the moment. And that sounds okay until you start to split out in the registration statistics. The battery electric vehicles between 3.5 and 4.25 tonnes are included in the heavy vehicles. But in reality, they're a 3.5 tonne van taking advantage of the driving licence derogation to enable a car driver to drive up to 4.25 tonnes. So if I take out the battery electric vehicles in the 3.5 to 4.25 tonne sector, and I look at the line below, what I see is that the number of battery electric vehicles greater than 4.25 tonnes is only running at about 0.1% of the 0.1.2% of the total number of vehicles registered. If we look at the next slide, what we can see is from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders registration statistics, which are this year, they have a slightly different way of reporting. So what they're showing is light commercial vehicles goes up to 6 tonnes and heavy commercial vehicles goes above 6 tonnes. So the 3.5 to 4.25 tonne vehicles are in light. But what we're seeing is that of a total sales of 130,000 vehicles in Q1, electric vehicles were representing around about 18%. In cars, that was 20%, which is an improvement on 2024 when it was 15. So it's moving very much in the right direction. On light commercial vehicles, similarly, that's up to 8% from 5.7. So again, moving in the right direction. Heavy goods vehicles moving in the right direction again, but still a long way off where we need to be looking to. Q2 and Q3, where the total numbers in the same format aren't yet published, but the numbers which I've seen say that that trend is continuing, and this year will close with figures that are better than the Q1 numbers. So that really gets us to a good point to bring in Lewis Jones, who works for DAF, and will now give us a little bit of an insight on what DAF are doing on the heavy electric vehicle markets. So, Lewis, welcome. First of all, congratulations for DAF for achieving Truck of the Year for next year for their EV range, which is a fantastic achievement. And you're proud and very keen to talk to us about DAF electric vehicles. So, shall we start off with what's available, what isn't available, and where do you see the market going?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name's Lewis Jones. I'm the EV and Connected Services Director for DAF Trucks UK. And yeah, this year is a very important year for DAF from a electrification perspective. Also from a manufacturer perspective, we've celebrated this year 30 years of consecutive market leadership in the UK. Obviously, the 99.9% of that has been achieved through diesel vehicles. But now we are moving into a world where electric vehicles are really starting to accelerate in the UK. So we've launched this year our kind of new generation DAF electric range. So XBs from 12 to 19 ton vehicles, 18 vehicles with the additional 1 ton. Also rigids, so our XD and XF. So we've got 2 and 3 axle rigids, and then also our tractor units, which is where we've seen the most vehicles deployed in the UK this year. So we've got 2 axle tractors at the moment, XDs and XFs. And a lot of the ones that we've deployed so far this year has been through the ZHID program, or the Zero Emission HGV and Infrastructure Demonstration in the UK, which is a government program that will be deploying over 300 zero emission trucks in the UK, of which DAF will be delivering about 90 of those 300. So yeah, it certainly feels that this year things are really starting to accelerate from a zero emission perspective for heavy goods vehicles. And yeah, that was only going in that upwards trajectory that you referenced, Martin.
So where do we go to from here? The vehicles which aren't currently available, obviously the UK Arctic market is 10% 2 axle vehicles and 90% 3 axle vehicles. What's going to happen for the 6x2?
Yeah, so the vast majority of the electric tractor units that have been registered in the UK and across Europe so far have been 2 axle tractors. I guess there's a number of reasons for that. A 2 axle tractor allows more space on the vehicle to fit batteries. So that's been the kind of first iteration that most manufacturers have come to market with. As well as that, here in the UK, we have dispensation at certain total vehicle weights. So at a 2 axle tractor and 3 axle trailer combination, you can go up to 42 ton as opposed to 40 ton, and that is there to offset some of the additional weight that you'll be carrying with the batteries on the vehicle. At the moment, there isn't that same weight dispensation at across 6 axles, so across a 3 axle tractor and 3 axle trailer. So you're still limited at 44 ton. So you've got, I guess, the double impact there in terms of not being able to go above, but then also trying to fit those batteries on the vehicle as well, really. So that's kind of why the market has really focused on that so far. But I think what we'll see into next year is more 3 axle tractors at some point in time as well, across multiple manufacturers, including DAF. So that will also kind of move things forward. But what we've seen so far from the vehicles that we've deployed, we've achieved over 500,000 kilometers this year across those vehicles in operation. And we're really starting to see now that operators are putting them on real work, carrying real loads, and also achieving total cost of ownership parity over a 5-year period, which based on the sums that we've done as well. So I think now our focus really is around number one, proving that an electric alternative can absolutely do the job, and number 2, evidencing how total cost of ownership parity can be achieved as well over a 5-year time horizon.
Lewis, thank you. We're focusing very much on electric vehicles. Do you see any other form of alternative fuels penetrating the UK market at all? Obviously, your parent company, Backhouse, has been very progressive with hydrogen, I think, in the United States. Is there any sign of anything like that potentially coming into the UK market? Or are there just simply infrastructure restrictions that prevent that?
Well, so through the ZHID program that I talked about previously, a portion of those 300 plus vehicles will also be hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, not delivered by DAF, but by other manufacturers. And part of that funding and program is to test the technology and test the whole hydrogen ecosystem here in the UK as well. Obviously, there are a number of challenges to hydrogen heavy goods vehicles, such as availability of hydrogen in the right places, the right shade or color of hydrogen, green hydrogen, and a whole rainbow of other colors that are less and less kind of CO2 efficient, if you like. But also the cost of hydrogen as well is a really key one, which, at the moment, there are challenges in the way of all three of those parts of the hydrogen ecosystem. So, as you said, we are doing trials within the Backhouse organisation of fuel cell and also hydrogen internal combustion engine vehicles. But I think where we see the mass majority of focus from a zero emission perspective would be on battery electric, especially here in the UK, because of the infrastructure that we have. And the size of the country and strategic road network and all of these kind of things mean that, as a country, we are, set up quite well for battery electric, and that there are more and more public infrastructure hubs focused on heavy goods vehicles that are being installed, every month it feels like at the moment, such as the Milan's hub up in Immingham earlier this year.
Brilliant, thank you.
What about other alternatives, things like biofuels? What's your view on their place in the markets?
Yeah, so I guess there's a number of different options there that we as a manufacturer don't have a gas vehicle, so CNG or LNG. That has certainly played a role in previous years, as we've seen on the sats there, and probably will do over the coming years as well, in terms of achieving a considerable CO2 reduction. As it stands today, they're not a kind of zero emission alternative, so it's still need to be kind of phased out by the timelines we talked about earlier. There are also other options such as HVO as well, that can achieve a vast CO2 reduction without any real impact to an operation other than the cost of HVO itself, sourcing that. So yeah, there are absolutely a whole host of things that can be done to reduce CO2. All of them are heading in the right direction, but battery electric is probably where our predominant focus is in terms of achieving that zero emission by the tailpipe.
You see any future for the charging on the move systems? I know there are some people will propose that we must put overhead catenary up, or the Scalextric sort of slots in the road.
Yeah, I think technology-wise, it absolutely makes sense. That a catenary system or electric road system would allow you to carry less batteries, maximize your payload, but obviously the key there is the infrastructure. It's so dependent on infrastructure, as well as bridge heights and all this kind of stuff in the UK. So technologically wise, absolutely, but it's there's a lot of infrastructure that we need to be installed in order to make that happen, which it feels like the majority of focus is on standard charging at hubs, at depots, both from a kind of government and funding perspective, and also from a manufacturer perspective as well.
And when we talk about infrastructure, I know people have challenges in getting electrical supplies of a suitable size and capacity for EV charging. What's your experience, and how can DEFRA as a manufacturer actually help with that?
Yeah, so within the Backhouse organisation that we talked about, we have Backhouse Power Solutions, so we can provide charging infrastructure alongside the trucks, whether that be from AC chargers, for an XB, a medium duty vehicle, for example, all the way up to high powered DC charging and battery energy storage systems as well, which battery energy storage systems especially can be a really good option for a site that is restricted from a capacity perspective. So yeah, we have a role to play to support our customers in the vehicle is one thing, but arguably the more intricate side is infrastructure, especially at the depot. So we're also kind of learning ourselves. We're very proud of the size of our dealer network across the UK, and our sales dealers are installing 180 kilowatt chargers at every location as well across those 34 sales sites. Part of that is to be able to support customers with electric vehicles and charge opportunity charging or at PMIs, but almost the secondary reason for doing that is to really learn firsthand the process and challenges that an operator may face themselves in upgrading their site. So yeah, we've got a role to play absolutely in supporting customers, not just with the vehicle but with the chargers as well.
Very good. And the dealers, they all okay and happy to work on electric vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. There's different elements to that. There's training, so there's both IMI training. So we've got over 200 technicians across the network in the process, or already IMI level 3 trained at the moment, which allows you, that covers the kind of safety aspects of working on an electric vehicle. And then we've also got our kind of DAF specific EV training that they are all kind of working through. There's tooling as well. There's PPE and there's kind of site preparations that we've kind of fast tracked it this year, sheerly due to the vehicles that we're deploying for the ZEA program, to ensure that we initially focused on our sales locations, making sure they were up and running, but we're dependent on where our customers want to deploy their electric vehicles, really. So we've had to really quickly ramp up some of our smaller sites and our service locations to ensure that wherever you drop a DAF electric, you can have comfort and confidence that this local service and dealer will be able to support you as well. So it's a real journey we've been on, and I'm sure that's going to really continue as we ramp up EV adoption as well.
Yeah, it's a big challenge for technicians who've had a career and a lifetime working on a diesel vehicle to actually start to get their head around a vehicle which is totally different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost throwing the rule book out and all the tips and tricks that they've learned over the previous decades of their experience. Now it's a completely new world of high voltage cables and everything else that comes along with that. But at the same time, of course, diesel vehicles are also not not going anywhere fast in volumes as well. They're still going to be going through our workshops as well. So it's going to be that combination and transition that's going to be really important for our technicians, really.
Yeah, even post phase out of non-EVs or non-zero emission vehicles, there will still be the majority of vehicles will be conventional vehicles, and that will remain for the lifetime of those vehicles.
Absolutely.
That brings us on to a good point, really, to bring Tony in and look at the experience of somebody who's lived it, breathed it, and had all of the trials and tribulations of running EVs.
You say that. So I think the first point I just like to make is I don't consider myself to be a subject matter expert, but I'll take it. But I am surrounded by subject matter experts in our fleet team. So I've actually only been in post for 7 months, taking it from Dale, who was in post for 20 years, and some of you will know. So I don't think I have the battle scars as some people do, but I'm deludedly optimistic in this space. So thank you for inviting me along.
So give us an idea of the fleet that you manage and the electrics that you're running, and a bit of the experience of how those vehicles are operating.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, so as DEFRA Group Fleet Services, we operate around 10,000 assets across 12 of the DEFRA agencies. The Environment Agency, which I'm actually an employee of, is kind of our biggest client. It's very diverse. I mean, we're classed as a mega fleet, and that's simply just based on cars and vans. But we also have HGVs, which is a mixture of Arctics and rigids. We've also got some rigids with drawbar trailers. We've got 4x4s, all of which are both leased and purchased. We've got plant equipment, so again, trailers, excavators, tractors, a mixture again of leased and purchased. We've then got boats, which is quite a difficult category, especially in the
another challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, water and electric don't generally go well together. So, but we've made some really interesting strides on that, which I'll come on to in a bit. But and then we've got our pumps, which obviously we're very reliant on for our instant response. But all of these assets, right across the DEFRA Group, do a really interesting but wide-ranging sort of operational activities, from general routine maintenance, but environmental projects and schemes, and as I say, instant responses. The Environment Agency in particular are Cat 1 responders, so have statutory duties that they need to adhere to. It's been a real journey. I mean, we've made some real strides, and we are working towards the government target. So we've got a mixture at the moment. Our cars, all of our lease cars are fully electric. We're on target to be fully electric. We've done some real progress on our vans. We're taking on our first HGV next year. So that's exciting. And as I say, we've just finished refurbing a working boat called Glasson. So it's a barge effectively that is now fully electric. So I think it's been an interesting journey, and I'm sure some of my fleet colleagues will be able to give you the kind of the sort of the battle stories from days of old. But it's definitely been more progressive in the last couple of years. And the team have worked really hard to prioritise kind of the deployment in areas where the infrastructure and operational sort of readiness is strongest. You touched on infrastructure, and I think we'll touch on it in a little bit later, but absolutely is the key challenge for us and many other public and private sector organisations. But to give you an idea, I mean, from a strategic level, fleet contribute to 9% of the total EA, Environment Agency carbon, which is a massive when you think about our net zero goal. So it's a really important part that we're playing in driving organisational change, and yeah, we're doing very well. I'm very pleased and proud to be part of it.
And how have you found the acceptance from your drivers, or in many cases the driver is only using the vehicle, I guess, as a means of getting from A to B? It's not a transport operation in that sense, so their job is other than just driving. But how have they found electric vehicles compared to their previous diesel?
So I think there's been a lot of myths that the team have had to dispel. So people, when you first talk to some people about electric vehicles, they remember the horror stories of old, you know, of a really small boxy car where, God forbid, you should need your lights and your heating on at the same time, because you're certainly not going to get to where you need to get to. But we've had some really strong early adopters, and that's really helped us. So, for example, our environment monitoring cohort within the Environment Agency, they were one of our first adopters. They spent all day out collecting samples, testing rivers, getting them back to the labs, really time pressured, time sensitive. So things like range is a key issue for them, but they can be in some really remote areas as well. So they're not always going to be on main artillery roads where there's going to be a charging station within sort of the next 5 to 10 miles. But they've adapted brilliantly. Productivity has not dropped, and you know, they're firm advocates of what we're trying to do. There's a flip side. There's absolutely people in the organisation that are very resistant to change, and I think as fleet professionals, we just need to be empathetic towards that. Like it's a real step change in behaviour for some people, and it creates an enormous amount of anxiety because people are passionate about what they do. You know, we understand it's the right thing to do to electrify the fleet, not just because of government commitments, but because of our organisational strategies, our net zero ambitions, both within the organisation, but also globally. And we fully support that. But when you're faced with the thought of having to get to from A to B very, very quickly for like an instant, for example, and the possibility of it not happening, the risk is overwhelming for a lot of people. So we've spent a lot of time, we continue to do a lot of work on what is business need, and then trying to get people to kind of live the experience. A lot of it, once people understand how to charge, where to charge, what the range is, you know, the ranges have come on tremendously through sort of the evolution of the battery. People then start to realise actually this is a possibility, and they can thrive within that environment, like the monitoring. We've had to put in place an exemption for our 4x4s because, again, the incident response risk is too high. And at the moment, it's not just about the infrastructure, it's about the actual vehicles available on the market. So there's no 4x4 currently that can tow a 3.5 ton pump, which is what we do day in, day out, unfortunately, to respond to flooding incidents. So in that scenario, we can't possibly put the organisation in that risk. So it's a really fine balance. I think one of the myths that I would like to try and dispel today is there is not a tension within organisations, certainly within ours, between sustainability and operational delivery. There is more of a tension between sustainability and affordability, because the injection of capital at the beginning is far greater than ICE vehicles. And at the moment, the projection in terms of when you start to earn that money back is far further down the line than our current funding model. So it's it's a bit of a puzzle to try and fix in your own head, really, but it is the right thing to do. And I think, you know, the acceptance is far greater when the teams are being able to demonstrate that we understand the data, we've looked at mileage, work patterns, you know, we can support them on things like that through better telematics, and actually just being able to understand their business model. Just across our businesses, you know, across those 12, even the work that they do is really diverse. So, you know, you have to engage early with them and kind of get them ready. You know, it's more than familiarization. It's, you know, it's a change of lifestyle. But as I say, things like early adopters with environment monitoring, it's the way forward, because they will become your change champions, and that's what we've done. And we've adopted things like our net zero champions through our partnerships team. And again, it's building confidence in people to let them know that it's the right thing to do. But we're not going to do it at all costs, right? It's got to be a balanced progression, I think.
Tony,
sorry,
Tony, I think it's really interesting your point about range, because at one point the main topic when we talked about electric vehicles was all about range, and clearly you're now in a learning stage where range is not so much the issue. So we can almost take that off the table as a detractor to go down this route. And obviously the orientation into cost and the whole life cost of the asset is now becoming more focus point, aside from infrastructure. Infrastructure capability we know is starting to loosen and starting to get there. So I'm interested in that whole sort of cost component and how you view the economic cycle of a electric vehicle or alternative fuel vehicle, and in particular, what's your thoughts on residual values, and how do you overcome that hurdle of a vehicle going into a marketplace in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years time with an unknown real test on the residual values? Have you done any modelling on that?
Not to the level I'd like to have done to answer that question. But what do I think about that? I think it is an unknown market. I don't think anybody can demonstrate a second-hand market, for example. So when we talk about residual value, it is finger in the air. And you have to kind of hope for the best a little bit. It shouldn't detract you away from doing it. I think the constraints that we've got within the public sector, particularly, is on our funding model. You know, money is tight, and we are continuously, almost on a daily basis, making sure that we are spending taxpayers' money in the most appropriate way to deliver the most value for money. So, and it's always a difficult one, because if you look at kind of that whole sort of PESEL structure or model, you can have a driver, and a really significant one, across every single one, but not one single driver can be the only driving force behind it. So I think at the moment it's difficult. I think the unknown life expectancy of EV vehicles is really difficult. We're still trying to work through how what our sort of maintenance and our SIMAR costs look like. But we're working with experts from across the industry to try and do that. We've got fantastic support from internally from our sort of finance business partners. But I don't think we're alone in that challenge and that problem. And even talking to kind of the OEMs and, you know, our suppliers, you know, from sort of lease car perspective, they don't know either. So it's, you know, and I think this is one of the issues that OEMs face at the moment, is they're almost operating on a sort of a loss leader basis with EVs, because they're still making more money out of ICE vehicles. That said, we can benefit from that, because we want to adopt EVs instead of ICE. So yeah, it's not a straightforward answer, I'm afraid.
No, it's great.
I suspect what it will drive, though, is people keeping vehicles longer. Because
potentially,
obviously, by the time you get down to the point where the residual value for a vehicle is effectively the price of the scrap metal, then the difference between an EV and an internal combustion engine vehicle will be minimal. But that will take a long time to get there, and that maybe is where the market ends up going. That the sort of previous regime of changing vehicles every 3, 4, 5 years, maybe we do see vehicles being kept longer for 6, 7, 8, 9, even 10 years.
And
Potentially, I think
that's definitely a model which we are seeing in our experience with customers when engaging. You know, rather than the normal 4 or 5 years, we're looking at a 6 and 7 year life. Along with just clearly being able to, you know, manage that battery performance is critical, and what life is left in that battery is going to be the key driver to what is that residual value at the end. Take what Tony and Peter were saying earlier, and manage that throughout the whole life of the asset. It is going to be absolutely critical.
I think there's two things on that. Just two things on that.
Yeah.
I think where, you know, where some tensions could come is the difference between commercial fleet and lease cars, for example. My concern with lease cars is people will want to swap it more often because technology is evolving and everything's fancy and shiny and new. So you've got that trying to manage expectations. But then on commercial vehicles, whilst the battery might last longer, you have to remember that the machines that we're talking about get put through their paces every single day in some absolutely horrid conditions. And health and safety of our individual drivers has to be at the forefront. So again, that's where, you know, the slight tension comes of, you could sweat the asset for 10 years, but at what risk, you know, and where's the tolerance on it? So I think, you know, at the moment, the engine is changing. The structure of the vehicle isn't necessarily changing in the same way to have that same longevity. So you might find you've got an absolute rust bucket with a perfect battery. It's not the right thing to keep it there.
I guess
Not very good for the image.
I guess, Tony, there's another key message that I latched onto earlier when you were talking, and that is that you really harnessed expertise and knowledge around you to take and work with you on this journey. So I guess, Martin, Colin, that's a really important point for large fleet users making this transition. Don't do it alone. Use
collaboration is key.
Harness knowledge, bring that expertise as part of that journey with you.
It's a moment really that would be quite good to bring Colin in, particularly to look at how Fraikin can start to help with that, but very much as part of how do I understand what the situation is and how I can start to get involved. I think anybody who just puts the blinkers on and says, I'll worry about it in 2035, 2040 is going to have a big shock. You need to be starting to work now, even if you don't take a vehicle yet. Now's the time to start to do your planning, start to do your analysis, start to work out what will and won't work. And Colin, maybe you can give us a little bit of the Fraikin perspective.
I think just to follow on from Martin, I think first of all, you know, Fraikin's journey started over a decade ago with the introduction of our first 5-ton EV into London. And when I reflect back then and being involved in that project, at the time it had a range of 60 miles. If only it did 60 miles each day, and on some days was looking to do 30 miles. But so you could say actually we were definitely early adopters and at the forefront. And you know, as such, we've been ahead of the curve throughout, taking that early approach, working with our customers through this journey. And you know, for me, I'd recommend any customer would be first to understand why you want to make the change. You know, listening to Tony there, a lot of customers believe it is the right thing. Sustainability is key. You've got your own employees to think of, customers, and as well as shareholders. But my recommendation would be to carry out an initial pilot that allows you to test a small number of vehicles, working with a small number of driver champions and internal stakeholders, and collaborate with a fleet expert who can bring together all parties to work on that solution, following which you then need to then go through your full assessment. Data is key. Harnessing data and moving forward. The technology on vehicles is so advanced, driver training, driver safety. And when you're moving ahead to EV, it becomes even more vital because then you're looking at battery management, battery charging aspects. So for myself, definitely it's not going to be one size fits all. There could be a combination as we move forward through EV, combination of CNG, which we operate and support customers with today, as well as the biofuels, and still diesel as part of that fit. As Tony said, if you're unable to get a 4x4 EV, what is your alternative solution then? How can I still drive down my CO2 commitments and hit those targets I put in place? But as part of any adoption, and as you move forward, I think the key is to ensure you put in the metrics or the performance measures to measure that performance, around your total cost of ownership and payback period. Is that 5 or 7 years? The vehicle uptime and reliability is going to be key. Where do you charge? Are you going to be charging on site with on-site infrastructure or off-site in the public structure? And clearly, when you put both of them two together in your total cost of ownership, there's a significant cost difference. So if you've only modeled based on your depot charging and you end up charging en route every day, then you've got to see a difference in that total cost of ownership, and a big difference throughout. So charge utilisation is definitely a step which you need to undertake and improve, along with adhering to the routes. As going back to Tony, certain applications and routes will be more suitable to that initial adoption to EV, and that's the role Fraikin play, to really harness, analyse that data, and work with our customers to select a small proportion first of fleet before you fully scale up and move to that full adoption of EV.
I think it's worth just bringing in the issue of the driver, that the driver is key to the success. And certainly from my experience, if you give somebody an EV without an adequate training on how to drive an EV and how to get the best out of it, they will drive around with a big smile on their face because they'll use the acceleration that an EV will be able to achieve and think they're Michael Schumacher or Lewis Hamilton or Lando Norris these days. And the energy consumption will be extraordinarily high. The range will diminish. So how do we achieve, or what's the experience of the three of you on how we can actually get to a point where the drivers understand how to get the best out of an EV? Yeah,
well, from my perspective, we see that bearing truth in the efficiency data that we monitor. It's light and day. You could almost take the chassis numbers away and see which vehicles had a driver training handover and which ones hadn't, because it really is night and day. Obviously, there's instant torque on EV vehicles, so they're fantastic to drive, but you need to use the regenerative braking to its absolute maximum in order to really extend that range and kind of get the numbers that are quoted, really, because it is different to driving a diesel truck. It's similar to driving an electric car, which obviously many people do nowadays, and one pedal driving is definitely a new concept, but if you can master it, it really allows you to eke as much efficiency out of it as possible. So driver training is crucial. We've got driver trainers across our network and across our dealers, because it's, for diesel trucks it's important, but for EV trucks it's so absolutely crucial to ensure that the drivers are bought in and getting the most out of the truck.
It's definitely about culture shift. Culture shift and behaviours. So if you think about diesel vans, the common sort of approach to it is, you've got a big van, fill it with everything you've got, cart it around just in case you need it, and you can't really do that with an EV. Well, you could, but you won't go very far. So it's making people aware of that. And again, we've had some great examples. I'm sorry to keep banging on about the monitoring teams, but the way that they now kit their vans out is really sort of light touch, but it's very effective, and therefore it extends the battery life and the range. So it is just about that. But you're right, the appeal of being able to put your foot down and go from 0 to 100 very quickly is probably quite tempting for a lot of people. But we just try and remind them that's not necessarily a safe thing to do either. We don't condone it. Yeah. I just wanted to come, Colin, just on your point there about how we can help each other. I think my advice to people that are starting out on this journey is, look at your infrastructure far earlier than what vehicles you might want to put on it. And if you've got an estates department, work with them. You know, partnering with them can really help because they know where their estate is going in terms of their strategy. They also probably know what load is available from an electrical supply point of view already and whether or not DNO applications needed to be done. But I think a lot of people really underestimate how long DNO applications can take, how expensive they can be, and actually how viable it makes that property. So I think, you know, if we were to look back, I think that is the one thing we would have liked to have done quicker, because at the moment our infrastructure is not keeping pace with our electrification of vehicles, and people will often sort of push back to me on this sort of conversation and say the public infrastructure is far better than it used to be. Absolutely agree with that, but there is probably 300 times more EV cars on the roads as well. So even that's not keeping pace with the car. So yeah, definitely collaboration, but infrastructure is so important.
Definitely. Yeah, it's also important. And yeah, when speaking and engaging with customers, that is one of the top topics really, to reach out far in advance of the DNO, to the DNO provider, to really understand that, because that could be years away and it could be hundreds of thousands of pounds. And you know, engage with the estate, because you don't want to make that investment and then all of a sudden change locations in 2 or 3 years.
And we've got properties that are really, really remote that, you know, quite frankly, are just not financially viable for the DNO to put that supply in.
Yeah.
You know, so again, we need to look at that and make sure that we're protecting our business operations, because the minute the business feel unprotected or at risk, they'll resist. So you need to mitigate that from really early on to understand, you know, what their concerns will be and how you're going to manage that for them.
Yeah, the vehicle has got to do the job. If it won't do the job, you've lost the transition immediately. And I guess the key thing for any fleet is to start to look at what your energy requirements will be. You know what your current diesel usage is, and you only have to talk to either Fraikin or DAF or any of the other manufacturers to understand, for that amount of diesel used, how much electricity are you going to need? How many kilowatt hours do you need? And you know what that'll be per day, and therefore you know what charging period you've got. You can see what size supply you need. And you've got to start thinking about that very early on. And it's key to get the initial building blocks as to how do you do a transition in place sooner rather than later. You know, buying an electric vehicle with no means of charging it, you've got an asset which is costing you an awful lot of money sitting there doing nothing. You've got to get your plans in place right at the very beginning. And I think that's one of the key messages that we need to get across today, is planning, and start to talk to people, start to get a really clear idea of what the impact of electrification is for your business, where you've got the potential possibility in the short term, where you haven't got the possibility in the short term, what can you do in those scenarios. You know, it's a good example, your one, Tony, of a depot which is in an area where to get the required electricity supply to that depot will be enormously expensive, you know, running cables over a lot of miles. That's not going to happen in the short term. Now, longer term, who knows? But short term, that won't happen. So what's your backup plan? And Lewis mentioned things like HVO. Well, that can move you a stage towards decarbonisation. Doesn't do much for the air quality issues of zero emission vehicles, but probably a vehicle which is running in an area where there isn't the electricity supply is almost certainly a vehicle where air quality is not the major concern. So maybe in the short to medium term, that's an alternative. But it's a case of starting to look and understand all of these factors so that individual fleets, and in your own fleet, you can actually start to make some plans, make some decisions. Sitting around and doing nothing is not the answer. You've got to start working, and you've got to start working sooner rather than later. I think that gets us
the challenge.
Point.
I think some of the challenges businesses have got is getting other people within the organisation outside of fleet to recognise the business criticality of fleet, and then getting them to start thinking about their workforce planning So it's not just about us telling them how, what they're going to need to do, but actually putting adaptations in place. So if you haven't got the infrastructure within a depot or within an office to charge your vehicle, you're going to have to build in some time for that vehicle to be charged. Now, if it's not a home charging possibility, there may be perceived downtime, but working that in and actually planning that early will help that transition. So people aren't feeling like they're being squeezed by this transition to deliver the same amount of work in less time. The stats from our point of perspective, nobody has reported a drop in productivity since transitioning to EV. And I'm sure they would have been straight on the phone to me if that was the case.
I'm sure they would.
So I think again, it's just having that planning, but not just planning in fleet. We've got to branch out into other parts of the business to say,
yes,
we need to do this, but we need to do it together. There needs to be unity in that approach. Otherwise, you fall at the first hurdle.
Good. I think that gets us to a point where Peter will invite you back to just get to a point of closing. We're nearly on the hour.
Yeah, I think we are. Excellent. Thank you, Martin. Very much appreciate your management of the webinar web call. I think the brilliant content and brilliant discussion, and it reminds me of two things. Firstly, it reminds me of Charles Rolls and Henry Royce, both who, as you'll know, came together to form the Rolls-Royce brand. Both of them were champions of electric vehicles in the early 1900s, and in fact Charles Rolls was very passionate about developing electric engines for their emerging motor cars, only to be taken over by Henry Ford, who insisted on internal combustion engines being the way forward. How the world would be different if only Mr. Rolls and Mr. Royce had managed to actually create that electric motor that could drive a vehicle in good efficiency. And then secondly, I'm reminded of a child watching the electric milk float deliver its daily milk to my parents' door. And little did I know at that time that little milk float and the friendly milkman were the pioneers of future of global transportation. So perhaps some lessons from the past can help us in the learnings of the future. So I'd like to thank you, Martin. I'd like to thank each of our speakers today, Colin, Tony and Lewis, and of course, Martin, for giving us such insightful knowledge and experience. As we draw this session to a close, please do remember to follow Fraikin on our social media channels and look out for more information as momentum on this important topic gathers at our website. Lastly, I'd like to offer a real appreciation to all of our parties and participants who have given us your time and interest in joining us today. As a reminder, please do send your questions in. I'm sure there are many, and also follow our progress, as I mentioned, on our website. And that simply leaves me to close today's session by saying goodbye, wishing that you stay safe and enjoy the rest of your fully charged up, electrifying day. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.